Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. Hope everyone's having a great week. I've got a really interesting story planned for this week's episode. But before we get to that, let's go to the true crime section. 3 Florida drug traffickers were sentenced for kidnapping a rival, then torturing him for 18 hours by pouring hot sauce into his eyes and anus. Mario Espino orchestrated the kidnapping and hours-long torture of a former partner in crime turned enemy, Gabriel Ledger, no relation to Keith, demanding 10 kilograms of fentanyl from Ledger's cartel sources after they beat and bound him. Ledger was eventually found in the backseat of a car with a pillowcase over his head and zip ties and electrical cords wrapped around his wrists. The trio fled when they saw cops leaving behind 22 kilograms of methamphetamine, 100 grams of fentanyl, a firearm, and more than 10 grand in cash in the car. Espino was sentenced to 22 and a half years in federal prison, while fellow torturer Young got 25 years, and Guest, I'm guessing that's his last name, Guest, who was present for the torture but did not actively take part in it, got 20 years. Ledger was given a tube of Sensodyne and released from the hospital. What can I say? You get involved in the drug game, and bad things happen. I guess these guys were friends, partners, and maybe one guy thought he cheated the other guy or whatever happened. It wound up with hot sauce in the eyes and ass. It's just disgusting. Ex-NYPD Commissioner Bernard Kerik, who was known as America's Cop and led the city's police department through 9/11 terror attacks, died Thursday after he was hospitalized with cardiac disease. He was 69 years old and surrounded by family and friends at the time of his death at New York Presbyterian Hospital, and that is a good hospital. Kerik pled guilty to 8 federal felonies, including charges that he evaded taxes on $255,000 gift, home repairs, and made false statements to federal authorities while being considered for the Homeland Security post. Kerik served 4 years in federal prison before he was pardoned by President Trump in 2020. I've got mixed reviews on Kerik. He kind of rocketed into, he was a detective, and somehow he got very political and he became the corrections guy, commissioner, and then when Giuliani came in, Bratton kind of got forced out and they put in Kerik. Kerik pretty much did the same thing Bratton was doing before he fell out of favor with Giuliani. I don't think Kerik was a bad guy, but he surrounded himself with a lot of guys that took advantage of the power, and they were just running amok, and they were abusing people, and they took CompStat to a whole new level. Commanding officers going to CompStat, getting smacked around and embarrassed. But then it also bled down to Kerik and his little gang. They would drive around and get involved in shit and then hand it off to precinct cops. And the guys that his bodyguards and his guys that ran his security detail and guys that, ran his whole operation, they were drunk with power, and they rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. He was supposed to run Homeland Security, and then they started finding issues, and then they got him for lying. I don't know if his arrest and conviction was political, but, he did get sentenced to federal time, and then Trump stepped in after he did 4 years and pardoned him, and then he was back on Fox News and different television shows giving interviews. So, again, I had mixed feelings on the guy. I don't wish anyone dead. Rest in peace. An urgent manhunt continued Wednesday for Travis Decker, the homeless veteran wanted for the murder of his 3 young daughters, whose tied-up bodies were found with plastic bags over their heads 3 days after he picked them up for a scheduled custody visit. Decker, 32 years old, faces 3 counts of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping following the deaths of his daughters, who were found at a Washington campground Monday close to the pickup truck where their dad lived. He is believed to have been a paratrooper who were in the elite Ranger tab, meaning he has wilderness and evasion survival skills. I don't get these people that murder their own children. I'm not okay with murder, but your own kids, you brought them into this world and then you do something like that. There's a special place in hell for people like him. It's eerily similar to a guy by the name of Robert William Fisher from Scottsdale, Arizona. In one, he killed his wife and 2 kids and then vanished into the woods, and he hasn't been seen again. If you see either of these guys, please call the local authorities. Deputies said a Florida man has been arrested for attempted murder after he allegedly hit a man in the head multiple times and dug his grave in a homeless camp. Reports show the incident took place at the DeLand homeless camp off International Speedway Boulevard and Stone Street. The attack left the victim in critical condition. Deputies have arrested 29-year-old Giovanni Bubnik, right, and charged him with attempted murder. There's nothing like a tidy homeless person who digs a grave for his upcoming murder victim. This is my favorite story. Two motorcyclists traveling on I-4 near mile marker 110 struck an alligator, causing one rider to crash into a tree. Both motorcyclists, a 67-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman, were taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission officials responded to assist the injured alligator. The extent of the alligator's injuries was not immediately known. The crash remains under investigation. Welcome to Florida, where prehistoric creatures just kind of pop out of nowhere and can ruin your day. And I've told this story when I was a cop in Florida. They gave us a half-day course on how to wrestle these things and tape them up with duct tape. I was like, thanks, but no thanks. I would just shoot one of those things. So today's story is about a New York City police officer who was murdered in the line of duty. On August 17th, 1979, at 11:25 a.m., New York City police officer Robert Schimenti was walking his beat near Grand Central Station, where he was flagged down by a woman who told him a man in a mask had just robbed a bank at 100 Park Avenue. As Officer Schimenti turned towards the bank, he observed the suspect exit and began to flee north on Park Avenue on foot. Officer Schimenti began to chase the suspect and got on the radio for assistance. As he pursued the suspect, there happened to be two detectives from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office assigned to organized crime. They were in the area. They saw this foot cop chasing the bank robbery suspect. They joined in the chase. The three of them chased the suspect into Kitty Kelly's shoe store located at 77 East 42nd Street. So as the gunman's running into the shoe store and they're screaming at him, he turns around with a gun and starts firing at them. And he unloaded an Ivor Johnson .380 semi-automatic pistol at the three cops, according to witnesses. And before he shot, Officer Schimenti shouted, "Stop or I'll shoot," before the gunman turned around. And like I've said a million times on this podcast, most cops aren't afraid of getting killed. They're afraid of getting in trouble. So just the fact that he yelled that shows you what a mindset of as a cop, that they just don't go around shooting people. Unfortunately, Officer Schimenti was shot in the chest and removed to Bellevue Hospital, where he later died of his injuries. The detective assigned to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, his name was Gregory Demetrio. He was 31 years old and a 10-year member of the New York City Police Department. He was critically wounded in the abdomen, but thankfully he recovered from his gunshot wound. So while this is unfolding, and it's by Grand Central Station, you had two Conrail cops. I'm guessing Conrail became Metro North Police. I have to look into that. But two Conrail cops, Mr. Cliff Fromer and James Paddock, shot the suspect in the foot. And the suspect's name, or murderer, is 37-year-old at the time, Peter Donahue, in the leg. And they caught him hiding under a van on East 43rd Street in Midtown. He was captured, and when they cuffed him up, he had an additional 8 live rounds in his pocket. So let's look at the robbery that started this terrible incident. The killer, Peter Donahue, entered a chemical bank located at 100 Park Avenue wearing a mask to make him look like a black man. And he points a gun at the teller, and he makes off with $2,000. But here's the thing. 45 minutes earlier, he robbed a Chase Bank located at 7th Avenue and 31st Street for $6,300. So this guy's on a crime spree. He robs two banks within 45 minutes of each other. But the first bank robbery, the dye pack explodes outside the bank, rendering the money useless. So he abandons the satchel of cash, and he vanishes into a Midtown hotel. And like I said, he's on a crime spree. So police officer Schimenti was 36 years old at the time, and he became a member of the New York City Police Department in March of 1967. He had 12 years on the job at the time of his death. He was married. He had 2 young daughters, ages 9 and 10 years old, and he was a resident of Staten Island. Police officer Schimenti worked in Midtown South Precinct, had a steady footpost known as the Grand Central Beat, and according to store merchants and his commanding officer, he was liked by co-workers in the community he served. What's sad about this case, I mean, the whole thing is sad, is Officer Thomas Schimenti was one of 1,000 NYPD cops selected by a random lottery to receive a bulletproof vest. So for those of you who don't know, back then, bulletproof vests were not part of standard NYPD equipment. The day he was scheduled to be fitted for a bulletproof vest, He was in the hospital for a medical issue, so he never received his bulletproof vest that may have saved his life that day. So on August 21st, 1979, 5,000 NYPD members showed up to pay their respects for slain police officer Thomas Schimenti's funeral at St. Teresa's Church in Staten Island. His burial was later held at Morrivan Cemetery on Staten Island. And NYPD funerals are something to see. Usually there's anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 cops show up for an NYPD's funeral. And it's not just the NYPD that shows up. There's cops from all over the country that show up. Let's look into the killer. So Peter Donahue was described as a white man, 5'8", 160 pounds, brown eyes, brown hair, and used the aliases of Robert Hubbard and John Dunn. And he was 37 years old when he was captured. He had a lengthy rap sheet through 5 states going back to 1959. And he had previously served state time for a bank robbery. He had also been arrested for burglary, possession of stolen property, and auto theft. Before the 2 bank robberies and the killing of police officer Thomas Schimenti and the wounding of the Manhattan District Attorney's detective, Thomas Donahue had also escaped from a halfway house called the Pyramid House in Newark, New Jersey, where he was serving 8 years of a 28-year prison sentence. In 1971, he was sentenced for a Seattle bank robber, and then he received another 4 years for busting out Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas, and another 3 years for another attempted escape. He had also served time in the New York State prison system. Anyone seeing a pattern here with this guy? Peter Donahue also had a criminal record for robberies in San Francisco, Atlantic City, New Jersey, Wichita, Kansas, Wichita Falls, Kansas, and I couldn't pull it up, but there was another arrest somewhere in Texas. Now, somehow, while this guy is at the halfway house, he gets his hand on a gun from someone from Miami, and he was able to get it up to the New York City area to pull off these robberies and shoot 2 cops, and I'll get into that in a minute. And according to, famous New York City beat writer Jimmy Breslin, Peter Donahue got his start in crime in the early 60s, where he beat up and robbed gay men in Central Park. So probably back then, a lot of his victims were reluctant to press charges. Like, this guy is an outlaw. I mean, no doubt about it. He's a stick-up guy. That's all he knows. He was never going to give up a life of crime. Now, the .380 semi-automatic used to kill police officer Thomas Schimenti and wound NYPD detective Gregory Demetrio was traced to Dude's gun shop located on 20 Federal Highway in Pompano Beach, Florida. The gun was purchased by Demetrius Anacropoulos of 736 Lowell Avenue out in Long Island in Uniondale. So during the investigation, they recover the gun. They trace it to this guy, Anacropoulos. The ATF goes to investigate him. I don't think he says anything. I don't think he talks. So what the ATF winds up doing is they charge him with using a false Florida residency to obtain a firearm out of state. So you got this arch criminal on a crime spree through several states, kills 1 cop, wounds another. You would think they would keep an eye on this guy while he's healing up from his gunshot wound and he's on Rikers Island. Now, the judge, they had a bedside arraignment for this guy at Bellevue. And for those of you that don't know, when a prisoner is injured and they can't make it to court, and after a couple of days, what they do is they have what's called a bedside arraignment. So it's usually a couple of court officers, a judge, a district attorney, a stenographer, and a defense attorney. And then you got the cop or correction officers guarding this guy in the hospital. And how do you plead? Of course, he's going to say not guilty. And what happened was the judge told this guy, Peter Donahue, well, you're not getting out on bail with all your warrants and all your bullshit and with the evidence. Now, his defense attorney claimed that the cops beat the hell out of him with blackjacks and rubber hoses and all this other crap, and said that in addition to his gunshot wound, he was having difficulty urinating and he required a catheter, which kind of ties into something later. So anyway, like I said, he goes out to Rikers Island. And about 6 months later, and again, you would think that they would keep an eye on this guy with all the escape attempts, successful escape attempts, and murdering a cop. On February 25th, 1980, Donahue and 3 other inmates, on February 25th, 1980, Donahue and 3 other inmates, all of them convicted of killing New York City police officers in different incidents, escaped from Rikers Island. The inmates greased themselves up with some kind of lubricant, sawed out some of the bars, cut a hole in a plexiglass window, and got out of their unit. So 2 of the knuckleheads that Peter Donahue escaped with, a guy by the name of Charles Davis and Argentine Hodges, were captured walking back to the prison. So they got out, but what wound up happening is their makeshift flotation device made out of plastic bags broke apart. The water was ice cold. It's in February, so they turned around and walked back. It's like that the last scene in Raising Arizona. They broke out, but they went back. Argentine Hodges was in Rikers Island, and he was in the infirmary. I'm guessing all these guys were in the infirmary. But anyway, Argentine Hodges was wounded in a gun battle that killed patrolman Edward Fogel on Riverside Drive in East 178th Street during a traffic stop. So during this gun battle where this Argentine Hodges kills police officer Edwin Fogel, he's seriously injured. He has surgery, and now he has a colostomy bag on him. Somebody smuggled this guy in a jeweler's saw, and he hid it in his colostomy bag, and that's what he used to saw out the metal bars for them to bust out. Another inmate, Gregory Latine of Queens, was captured near the water's edge a few minutes later. He was on Rikers Island awaiting trial for a gun battle with Harlem cops, which resulted in an NYPD sergeant losing an eye. Jesus Christ. You want to talk about bad guys. They were all housed in a special unit for dangerous inmates, and I'm guessing it was an infirmary because all these guys had injuries. But of all these scumbags that busted out of Rikers Island, Peter Donahue had the most to lose. He was facing murder, bank robbery, weapons charges. He shot another cop on top of the escape, on top of the 20 years of federal time he owed. So his mindset at the time was probably, I'm never going to see the light of day. But then again, when you really think about it, who knows? With the clowns running the New York State Parole Board nowadays. But here's the thing. Police theorized at the time that Peter Donahue might have succumbed to the 40-degree waters off the East River running around Rikers Island. They didn't find his body. Three of the other guys were either captured or went back to the prison on Rikers Island. Peter Donahue that day vanished, and they had a massive dragnet, by all accounts of the NYPD cops. New York State Police showed up, and Department of Corrections. They had boats out and helicopters and planes for days. Peter Donahue's body was never found. So this is where it gets murky with this Peter Donahue guy. On April 22nd, 1980, so February, March, April, a couple of months later, an article from the Staten Island Advance reported that Peter Donahue's body was found under the dark waters of the Verrazano Bridge. That's the only article about it, and I looked everywhere, and it didn't say how his body was identified. There was no follow-up, nothing. But I found this story about Officer Thomas Schimenti's death on the Officer Down Memorial page. And according to the Officer Down Memorial page, it says the killer of Thomas Schimenti is still at large. So maybe the newspaper article spoke too soon, and the body that was recovered wasn't Peter Donahue's. Given the amount of prison time he served, I'm sure they had to have had dental records, because you're in jail that long. I'm sure he had a tooth pulled or something that there would have been an x-ray. Plus, Peter Donahue was from the New York City area, so I'm sure he had family. I'm sure when they were looking for him, they landed on every relative, and they probably had his dental records. But it just says that the body was found, but nothing else. And then you've got the Officer Down Memorial page that says he's still at large. So maybe when the body was recovered, it didn't have a head. If with no head, it's almost next to unless the guy had surgeries or something. They might only know that it was a male white. And I'm guessing after 2 months in that water, there wasn't much left of him. So whether the body that washed up under the Verrazano Bridge is Peter Donahue or not, in my humble opinion, he's dead. Peter Donahue is dead. Whether they found whether that body is him or not. Here's a guy who couldn't lie low if his life depended on it. Bank robberies, prisons escapes. This guy was a violent criminal that knew no other way of life. Had he survived the cold temperatures of the East River, this guy would have turned up somewhere like a bad penny. Peter Donahue reminds me of Wayne Grow. As a matter of fact, he looks like Wayne Grow from the movie Heat. He was a violent, unpredictable criminal, and he was a thrill seeker. Chances are he would have been paroled by now by the clowns running the New York State Parole Board. It's just a weird story, and it's a sad story. And on August 17, 1988, a popular street corner in Staten Island was renamed in honor of Officer Schimenti. Also, back then, a Staten Island ferry was named after police officer Thomas Schimenti, Jr. This story kind of reminds me of, there was a guy on the FBI's most wanted list for years. His name was Donald Eugene Webb. I should really, you know what, that's an interesting story. Guy killed a cop in Pennsylvania, was on the run for decades, probably 30-something years. And they were eventually able to clear the case and find his body and everything. But, you know, they were going after the family and everything. And the guy just vanished off the face of the earth. And, you know, this happened in the late 70s, around the time of this case. And to go undetected, especially after 9/11 with face recognition software and all the software now to track people. It was wild that this guy was able to stay alive underground for that length of time until they were eventually able to find out what happened to him. So I'll probably do that story maybe in a week or two. It's interesting. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Clearfield, Utah, Jersey City, New Jersey, St. Petersburg, Florida, Vernon, Connecticut, Moneca, Illinois, and Eagle, Colorado. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you enjoyed watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the content, check out my Amazon author page. Just type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. So you get the first chapter you can read for free, and including NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. I'm actually working on another book now. I'm probably about 180 pages in. And what usually happens is I get to about 200 and then I start self-editing, and then I send it out to the editor, and that's a whole thing. It goes back, you send it out for a copy edit, and then it comes back, and then I got to approve or disapprove the changes. Then I send it out for a proofread. I get it back. Then I send it out for formatting, so I'm able to upload a paperback version and an ebook version into the Amazon platform, and then the book cover. Book cover is actually the easiest thing to do. I don't do it. I'm not a graphic designer, but I've got a company. For those of you that are looking to write a book, I would definitely check out ebook.launch.com. It's a company in Canada. You can't get them on the phone, but they are legit. Everything's done through emails, but as you can see by the artwork, and they pair you together with different editors, and they stand by their work. So if you're looking to write a book and be a self-published author, like that's the route I went, I would definitely look into ebooklaunch.com, because there's a lot of bandits out there that'll take your money and they're going to do a shit job, or then they'll own a piece of your book rights. It's just not worth it. So anyway, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the support for the podcast, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care.